I was out one warm, humid evening at a familiar neighborhood bar, the kind of place where the air was thick with the scent of aged whiskey and laughter, and the clink of glasses created an almost hypnotic rhythm that made even the most mundane conversation feel important. I'd been enjoying a few drinks with some friends, loyal companions who had stuck by me through ups and downs, and we were sharing stories of old times when my phone suddenly vibrated against the worn wooden table. At first, I assumed it was one of the guys checking in or sharing a silly meme, but when I glanced at the screen and saw Emily's name flashing in bold, my heart skipped a beat in a way that was both unexpected and unsettling. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the device as if unsure whether to answer or let it ring on, but eventually I pressed the button and greeted her with a casual, "Hello?" Even though deep inside I already sensed that this call was going to be anything but ordinary. Her voice came through the line, unexpectedly cold and laced with a kind of amusement that chilled me to the bone. "I'm divorcing you," she said, each word deliberately clipped, as if she were reading from a script she'd rehearsed countless times. I sat there, frozen in disbelief for a few seconds, as her tone, so confident and mocking, seemed to erase all the shared memories of better times. I swallowed hard and forced a calm reply, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "Good for you," I said, the words coming out more as a challenge than as a casual remark, all while I finished my drink and set it aside as though it were the last sip of a bitter concoction. I realized then that she believed she had won, that her laughter and declaration signified a final, irrevocable decision. But deep down, I knew that she had no idea that I was already playing a different game. A game where I was no longer the passive recipient of her whims, but an active, calculating participant. As I hung up the phone, the noise of the bar seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a new, silent clarity. I sat there, letting the shock wash over me in measured waves. I recalled the years we had spent building our lives together, years in which I had been the unsung force behind the scenes, managing our business with meticulous care, ensuring that everything ran smoothly while she basked in the adoration of our public image. Now, that very business was hers to claim, or so she thought. I realized that for all the time we had shared, I had been quietly preparing for a moment like this, watching her every move and safeguarding the assets that truly belonged to me. I had documented everything, every meeting, every financial transaction that occurred behind the glamorous facade that she had so carefully cultivated. While she played the role of the charming, successful wife in the public eye, I had been the one controlling the strings, the one who truly understood the inner workings of our enterprise. In that moment, as the laughter of my friends mingled with the soft strains of background music, I felt an icy resolve form within me. I knew that this call was not merely a breakup. It was a declaration of war, a bold statement of independence from the woman who had taken our shared life and turned it into her personal playground. The irony of it all struck me sharply. She believed she had delivered the final blow, but she had no idea that I was already several steps ahead. I could almost see the pieces of my plan coming together as I replayed her words in my mind, each syllable confirming that she had underestimated the man she once called her husband. I allowed myself a moment to savor that realization, a quiet, internal smirk forming as I thought about how I had been preparing for this very moment with the precision of a chess master. I sat back, the dim light of the bar casting long shadows on the worn table, and let the implications of her call sink in. The game was now in motion, and while she was busy celebrating her supposed victory, I was already moving to ensure that she would lose everything. I thought about the countless nights spent poring over contracts and financial records, each document a silent testament to the work I had done to protect my interests. I remembered the discreet phone calls, the secret meetings, and the meticulous planning that had taken place long before this call, all of which had led to the moment when I could say, without a hint of doubt, that I was in control. That night, as I left the bar under a starless sky, every step I took felt like a step toward reclaiming my destiny. I walked with a determined calm, knowing that while Emily believed she had drawn a line in the sand, I was ready to redraw it in a way that would leave her utterly exposed. I resolved that I would not waste another minute mourning what was lost. Instead, I would channel my hurt and disbelief into action, into a series of calculated moves that would ensure she paid dearly for her betrayal. In that singular, pivotal phone call, everything had changed. And though she laughed, thinking she had the upper hand, I knew the truth. In this intricate game of power and retribution, I was the one who held all the cards. The call that changed everything had only marked the beginning of a new chapter in which I would not be the victim, but the victor. A man who, even in the face of devastating betrayal, would rise above and claim what was rightfully his. For years, Emily had been the dazzling public face of our company, the one who smiled for the cameras and charmed every investor and client with a seemingly effortless grace, while I labored quietly in the background, ensuring that every financial detail was impeccably managed and every decision was made with precision. I had been the silent engine behind our joint venture, the man who negotiated contracts, balanced the books, and handled the intricate matters of our business that required a steady hand and a keen mind. Every board meeting, every press release, every public appearance showcased her charisma, but behind those dazzling smiles lay a labyrinth of complexities that only I fully understood. I had spent countless sleepless nights poring over spreadsheets and legal documents, meticulously tracking every transaction and making sure that our assets were protected from any unforeseen threat. I knew that our company was more than just the image we projected. It was a delicate web of interests, investments, and risks that needed careful stewardship, and I was the one who bore that responsibility in silence. While Emily basked in the limelight and reveled in the adoration of our shareholders, I was the one who had truly built the foundation of our success. I was the one who knew the inner workings of every deal and understood the subtle shifts. I had spent months watching her closely, taking note of every slip, every whispered conversation, every secret meeting with questionable associates. I had documented her actions in great detail, gathering evidence of unauthorized transactions, questionable deals, and even corporate mismanagement that she had tried to conceal behind a veneer of charm and confidence. Every meeting she held with potential investors, every phone call that ended in hushed tones, every decision made without my consultation was a thread in the tapestry of her eventual downfall, a tapestry that I had been weaving long before she ever dared to utter the words that now echoed in my mind. I recalled how she had always believed that being the public face of our company gave her a free pass to act as she pleased, that the applause and admiration she received would shield her from any repercussions. But I knew better. I knew that the true measure of power was not in how many accolades one could gather, but in the strength of one's resolve and the solidity of one's actions behind the scenes. While she played her role with a practiced ease, I was the man who quietly built the empire that supported her. I had secured our assets meticulously, transferring funds and signing off on agreements that made it impossible for her to claim any control over what we had created together. I watched as she celebrated her perceived victory with careless laughter and boasts of her new beginnings, all the while being oblivious to the storm I had been preparing in the background. Every unauthorized transaction, every whisper of financial fraud, every slip in her otherwise flawless public persona was noted and cataloged, a silent ledger of betrayal that would soon be read aloud for all to hear. I took solace in the knowledge that while she believed she was in control, I had been the one holding the reins all along. I had the documents, the records, and the unwavering resolve to prove that her so-called victory was nothing more than a mirage, a fleeting illusion that would soon vanish in the harsh light of reality. As I sat alone in the quiet of my study, surrounded by stacks of meticulously organized files and legal documents, I felt a cold satisfaction welling within me. The meticulous planning had been my salvation. Every late night spent poring over contract after contract had been a step toward this inevitable moment. I reviewed the files again, each piece of evidence confirming that while Emily had been busy crafting her public image, I had been safeguarding the true heart of our enterprise. The irony was almost poetic. She had always believed that she could sell everything and walk away without consequences, but the truth was that I had made sure that every asset was secured in my name. I had built an impenetrable fortress around the parts of our business that truly mattered, and now that fortress would be her undoing. In my mind, I replayed the countless moments when I had quietly observed her arrogance, each moment a reminder that she thought she was the one calling the shots. Yet every move she made, Every deal she tried to manipulate had been countered by my careful strategy. I remembered the times when I had subtly hinted at the importance of due diligence, the moments when I had gently suggested that we review the books together, never knowing that those very moments were the calm before the storm. The realization that she had been deceiving not only me but also our colleagues, investors, and the world at large filled me with a resolute determination. I was not going to let her continue to steal the limelight or tarnish the legacy of what we had built. Instead, I would expose her for the fraud she truly was. The plans I had set in motion were not fueled by a desire for petty revenge, but by a steadfast commitment to truth and integrity. A commitment to protect the business, our legacy, and my own reputation from being dragged through the mud by her deceit. I thought about how, in the public eye, she was a charismatic leader and a visionary, but in the shadows, she was reckless and self-serving. It was time for the truth to emerge from behind the curtain. I had gathered every shred of evidence, every document that proved her wrongdoing, and I was ready to reveal it all. I knew that the day would come when the full extent of her mismanagement would be exposed, and when that day arrived, there would be no turning back. In that moment, as I sat with the quiet hum of my computer and the rustle of paper files filling the silence, I made a silent vow. I would protect everything I had worked so hard to build, and I would not allow her treachery to stand unchallenged. I would use every legal, financial, and personal resource at my disposal to ensure that she paid for her mistakes, that she lost everything she had ever believed was hers to control. And so, even as she reveled in her newfound freedom and boasted about her plans to start over with her new partner, I remained the man behind the curtain, quiet, calculating, and ever vigilant. I was determined to turn her so-called victory into her ultimate downfall, knowing that in this intricate dance of power, the true winner would be the one who was prepared for every move. The foundation of our enterprise, which she thought could be easily dismantled with a laugh and a hurried phone call, was firmly in my hands, and that knowledge filled me with an unyielding confidence. In that quiet study, among the silent testimony of paper and proof, I realized that the game had already been decided long before that fateful call. Now, it was merely a matter of time before the final act unfolded, and I would be the one holding all the cards, ensuring that the truth and my rightful control prevailed. I pulled into the driveway of our old home and felt the chill of the evening settle over me as I stepped out of my car, each step measured and deliberate. I had known that returning to this place would be more than just a nostalgic trip down memory lane. It would be the stage for a confrontation I had long anticipated. As I walked up the familiar path, the soft hum of streetlights and the distant murmur of traffic combined with my inner thoughts, forming a quiet symphony of determination and lingering regret. I had prepared myself for this moment, and now every nerve in my body thrummed with the certainty that nothing would be the same again. The large, ornate front door, which had once greeted me with warm familiarity, now seemed to loom like a silent judge waiting to witness the fallout of recent events. Inside, the living room was bathed in a cool, subdued light that barely masked the tension thick in the air. I could see her immediately. Emily sat on the plush sofa with a smug, self-assured posture that made it clear she thought herself in control of the situation. Beside her, Daniel, her new partner, stood with arms crossed and an expression that spoke of authority and ownership, as if he believed he had already claimed this space as his own. I paused in the entryway for a moment, taking in the scene with a sense of disquiet that mingled with the resolve I had forged over the past months. The room, decorated with the remnants of a once shared life, now felt cold and sterile, stripped of the warmth we had once known together. "Nathan, darling," Emily purred as she spotted me, her voice carrying a blend of condescension and feigned affection. "I believe we have some things to discuss." Her tone was both inviting and challenging, an ambiguous mixture that forced me to confront the betrayal I had been silently preparing for. I let my gaze sweep over the room, noting the way Daniel's eyes flickered briefly toward me before settling back into a steady, disapproving stare. I placed my briefcase deliberately on the coffee table with a soft click, letting that simple act resonate in the charged silence that followed. My every movement was controlled, purposeful, a silent declaration that I was not here by accident, that I had come prepared to set things right. I took a measured breath before speaking, my voice calm, and even as I said, "Oh, we do," the words fell heavily into the space between us, and for a split second, I saw a flash of uncertainty in Emily's eyes, a crack in the armor of arrogance she had carefully built around herself. I slowly opened my briefcase, the sound of its latch echoing in the quiet room as I revealed a meticulously organized stack of documents. Every sheet had been compiled with painstaking care over countless late nights, a testament to the months I had spent gathering evidence, securing my assets, and documenting every unauthorized transaction and secret meeting. I slid the first document across the table with deliberate precision, watching as it caught the light and briefly obscured her smirking face. "According to these legal papers," I said coolly, "you don't have the authority to sell anything." For a moment, the room seemed to freeze. The soft hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of a clock on the wall, and even the distant sound of a car passing by were swallowed by the silence that followed my words. Emily's confident facade wavered as her eyes widened in disbelief. "What do you mean?" she snapped, her tone suddenly sharp and uncertain. I allowed myself a small, ironic chuckle, a sound that was both amused and regretful, as I replied, "I mean, my dear wife, that while you were busy planning your escape and celebrating your new beginning, I was busy protecting my assets." My voice was as calm as if I were discussing an everyday matter, but each word carried the weight of all the years of silent vigilance and careful planning. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her, his arms tightening as he muttered something about controlling shares, but I barely acknowledged his presence. I pulled out another file from my briefcase, this one containing irrefutable proof of financial fraud, unauthorized transactions, and corporate mismanagement that Emily had meticulously hidden behind her carefully cultivated public image. As I placed it on the table, I watched the color drain from her face, her confident demeanor crumbling in the face of the cold, hard evidence. The living room, once a place of shared dreams and future promises, now became a tribunal where every secret lay exposed, every lie unraveled. I continued laying out the documents one by one, each piece a testament to the careful record-keeping that had become my silent shield against her betrayal. I could see that with every piece of evidence I revealed, the control she believed she wielded was slipping further away. Emily's smirk, once so pervasive, was now replaced by a growing sense of panic and desperation. Every time she tried to speak, her voice faltered, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, a stark contrast to the unwavering authority I had once taken for granted in her. I allowed a moment of silence to pass, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. The documents on the table were not just papers. They were the embodiment of my silent vigilance and a declaration that I was no longer willing to be a pawn in her twisted game of power and deception. At length, the silence in the room was punctuated only by the soft rustle of paper and the distant hum of the city outside, reminding us that life continued to move forward regardless of the confrontation unfolding in this living room. I met Emily's gaze steadily as I spoke once more. "While you were busy making plans behind my back, I made sure that everything that truly belonged to us, and to me, was secure." My voice was low, steady, and resolute, a quiet command that left no room for doubt. Daniel's expression was unreadable as he looked from me to her, and I sensed that the truth was beginning to sink in for him as well. For me, it was a long-awaited moment of clarity and vindication, a moment when every ounce of the meticulous planning, every sleepless night, and every whispered concern finally found its voice in the evidence laid before us. In that charged, silent moment, as Emily's face turned a shade of white that spoke of the shock and fear of impending ruin, I knew that the final act of this long, intricate play had begun. I closed my briefcase slowly, as if sealing away the remnants of a shared past that could never be reclaimed, and let my eyes linger on hers for a long, heavy moment. The confrontation was not merely about money or control. It was about the truth and the quiet, unyielding power of preparation. I had always been the man behind the curtain, and now, with every piece of evidence laid bare, I was stepping into the spotlight as the one who had truly controlled our destiny. In that moment, the homecoming was not a return to nostalgia, but the beginning of a reckoning that would forever alter the course of our lives. I pulled into the driveway under a sky heavy with twilight, the familiar curve of the road leading me back to a place I once called home but now felt charged with tension. Even before I stepped out of the car, I sensed that this homecoming would be unlike any I had ever experienced. Her car was already parked there, a silent testament to her punctuality and, perhaps, a subtle reminder that she was already in control of the scene. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for a moment, taking a deep breath as I braced myself for what was to come. Every mile I had driven was laden with memories, of happier times, of shared laughter, and of promises that now seemed like distant echoes. But I had long prepared for this confrontation, and with each passing second, a steady resolve filled me. Stepping out into the cool evening air, I walked up the gravel path toward the front door, my footsteps deliberate, each one echoing with the weight of everything that had led me to this moment. The door itself, once a welcoming threshold to our shared life, now appeared imposing and foreboding, as though it were the gatekeeper to the final chapter of a long, painful saga. I reached out, my hand trembling ever so slightly, and pressed the doorbell. The sound of the chime reverberated in the silence before the door swung open. Inside, the living room was bathed in soft, ambient light that barely masked the tension hanging in the air. There, on the plush sofa, sat Emily. She was already waiting for me with a look that was equal parts smug satisfaction and cool indifference, as if the outcome of this encounter had already been predetermined by her own arrogance. Her eyes sparkled with a self-assured glint, and the slight upturn of her lips was unmistakably the smirk of a woman who believed she had orchestrated her own victory. Beside her stood Daniel, her new partner, whose posture was rigid, arms folded in a way that suggested he considered himself the rightful master of this domain. He surveyed the room with a look that was almost territorial, as though his very presence were meant to undo the fact that he had already claimed this space as his own. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken challenges as I stepped into the living room. I could feel the silent weight of their expectations, the subtle power plays that had long been simmering beneath the surface of our crumbling relationship. A crack in the carefully maintained veneer of her composure. "Oh, we do," I said quietly, my voice calm and measured, though beneath it pulsed a fierce determination. I opened the briefcase slowly, as though each moment of unveiling would add to the gravity of the confrontation. Inside lay a meticulously organized stack of documents, files that I had compiled over months of quiet vigilance, each one a testament to the intricate planning I had undertaken to safeguard what was truly mine. The documents were arranged neatly, each paper weighted with evidence of every unauthorized transaction, every clandestine meeting, every moment when Emily had sought to undermine the very foundation of what we had built together. As I slid the first document across the table, I let the motion speak for itself. In that instant, the balance of power in the room shifted palpably. Emily's eyes widened as she leaned forward, her confident facade now marred by a flicker of uncertainty. Daniel's rigid posture wavered, and for the first time since I had walked through that door, I saw genuine surprise on their faces. I spoke again, each word deliberate and dripping with the calm finality of one who has been preparing for this moment for far too long. According to these legal papers, I began, letting my tone be as icy and precise as the evidence itself. You don't have the authority to sell anything. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable, as if sealing the fate of everything Emily had ever claimed to control. For a long, excruciating moment, the room was silent except for the soft rustle of paper and the slow, measured ticking of a clock on the wall. Emily's smirk evaporated entirely, replaced by a look of disbelief and dawning panic. I could see that the documents were undermining every notion of control she had prided herself on, and I took satisfaction in the quiet intensity of the moment. Every file in that briefcase was a nail in the coffin of her carefully constructed empire, a testament to the countless hours I had spent, unseen and unappreciated, ensuring that I would never again be at her mercy. As I looked across the table, I saw the unspoken understanding in Daniel's eyes, a realization that the game had been rigged long before this confrontation, and that his role in it was now diminished to nothing more than a reluctant bystander. I closed the briefcase slowly, each click of the latch echoing like a final verdict in the silent room. "It seems," I said softly, my voice laced with quiet authority, "that while you were busy plotting your escape, I was securing our future." The words were simple, but their impact was devastating. The living room, once a stage for our shared dreams, had transformed into a tribunal where every lie was laid bare, every betrayal exposed for the world to see. In that charged silence, as Emily's face contorted from smug assurance to ghostly pallor, I realized that this was more than just a personal confrontation. It was the turning point of our entire story. The homecoming had become the beginning of a reckoning, one where the truth would no longer be hidden behind false smiles and empty promises. And as I stood there, the man who had long been the silent guardian of our shared destiny, I knew with unyielding certainty that I had reclaimed not only the power to protect my assets, but the right to define our future on my own terms. I sat there in the oppressive silence that had descended over the room, the weight of the evidence I had just revealed sinking in like a tidal wave, and with every slow, deliberate breath, I felt the final act of our long, twisted game beginning to crystallize. In that moment, I knew that I had reached the checkmate. A point of no return where every move Emily had made, every covert transaction, every whispered betrayal was laid bare for her to see, and for me, it was a vindication of all the months spent gathering irrefutable proof. I opened my laptop and slowly turned the screen so that the harsh glow of digital evidence was directed squarely at her. The live bank transactions blinked on the screen in real time, a steady stream of numbers and dates that mapped out every shady deal, every unauthorized transfer that she had so brazenly executed behind my back. I could almost see the realization slowly dawning on her face as the evidence of her financial misdeeds unfolded before her eyes in cold, unyielding detail. "You're bluffing," she whispered at first, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and indignation. But as I continued to let the facts speak for themselves, her protests faded into silence. I watched her closely, my pulse steady and my voice measured as I said, "The SEC would be very interested in these transactions, wouldn't they?" The words hung in the air like a gavel, each syllable striking a final, decisive blow. I had been tracking her movements, meticulously recording every unauthorized transaction for months, and now that digital ledger was a damning testament to her betrayal. The room, already charged with tension from our earlier confrontation, seemed to tighten further, as if even the walls were bearing witness to this final moment of reckoning. Daniel, who had once stood silently by her side, took an involuntary step back, his earlier arrogance dissolving into a dawning realization that the ground beneath them was crumbling. His eyes flickered with confusion and a hint of fear, and I could tell that he, too, was now aware that the empire Emily had built on deceit was collapsing in front of us. I kept my gaze unwavering, knowing that every detail of the live transactions I displayed was a nail in the coffin of her false authority. The digital numbers scrolled slowly, relentless chronicle of her mismanagement and fraud, and each line on the screen was like a sentence passed in a trial she never saw coming. My heart pounded steadily, not with anger, but with a quiet, resolute satisfaction that the long game had finally reached its conclusion. I remembered all the nights spent poring over financial statements, the discreet meetings with trusted advisors, and the countless hours when I worked in the shadows, determined to build a fortress of evidence that could not be undone by a simple laugh or a dismissive wave of her hand. Now, as I looked at Emily's face, I could see that fortress was standing tall against her crumbling facade. "Do you understand now?" I asked softly, my voice steady and devoid of the bitterness that might have once fueled my anger. Instead, it was laced with a calm finality, a tone that left no room for negotiation. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat, and all I could see was a flicker of desperation and the slow realization that her carefully curated control was nothing more than a mirage. Every time I had suspected her treachery, every time I had noticed a discrepancy, I had documented it meticulously, and now those records were her undoing. The evidence on my laptop was not just numbers and dates. It was the story of our unraveling, the silent testimony to every lie and every secret transaction that had been hidden behind her polished smiles. I felt no glee in her defeat, only a cold, clinical satisfaction that justice, in its purest form, had been served. I continued to scroll through the transactions, letting the screen's glow reveal the extent of her mismanagement, and with every passing second, her composure shattered a little more, until all that remained was a vacant stare that said everything without a single word. I knew that this moment was more than just a personal victory. It was the final, irrevocable end to her reign of deception, and it was a turning point that would echo far beyond the confines of our broken partnership. In that silent, digital courtroom, the truth was laid bare, and no amount of frantic denial or desperate pleas could change the facts. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the finality of the action reverberate in the still air of the room, and I could feel the cold, measured satisfaction of a game well played. "It's over," I said softly, almost to myself, as I looked at the fallen figure before me. Once confident, now a shattered echo of her former self. I had delivered the checkmate with precision and with the calm efficiency of someone who had long prepared for this inevitable moment. In that charged silence, as the reality of the evidence settled over us like a dark cloud, I realized that while she might have thought herself triumphant just moments before, the true victor was already standing here, not with a roar of anger, but with a quiet, unyielding assurance that the game was mine to command. The room, the digital evidence, and the weight of every transaction told a single, unambiguous truth. Emily was finished, and with her downfall, the future that she had so desperately tried to control would now belong to me. I watched from the doorway as the quiet tension in the room broke into chaos, the evidence I had laid bare only the beginning of her undoing. I could hear the sharp buzz of Emily's phone, and then, as if in slow motion, I saw her eyes widen in disbelief while she fumbled to check the screen. In that instant, the air seemed to thicken around her as the gravity of my preparations began to manifest in real time. Her face, which had once carried that mocking smirk of arrogance, was now replaced by a look of pure panic. I could see it in the tremble of her hand as she scrolled through a series of urgent messages, the bank notifications that confirmed what I had long anticipated. Every single one of her accounts was being frozen, each message a cold confirmation that while she had been busy plotting her escape, I had been methodically securing my position. The sound of her startled gasp and the frantic tapping on her phone reverberated in the space between us, a stark contrast to the earlier calm of our confrontation. I stood there, silent and resolute, as she tried to grasp the reality of the situation. "You can't do this," she finally screamed, her voice echoing off the walls in a mixture of rage and despair. I felt no satisfaction in her outburst, only the cold clarity of the plan unfolding exactly as I had meticulously laid it out. "Actually, I can," I replied evenly, my voice a steady anchor in the swirling storm of her panic. I could see her words dissolve into the chaos of 1,000 notifications, and for a long, heavy moment, the silence that followed was as crushing as it was inevitable. Then, almost as if the universe were aligning to unleash the finality of her downfall, I noticed a slight shift in the room. Daniel, who had been a reluctant participant in her scheme, suddenly moved as if compelled by the unfolding events. Without a word, he abruptly grabbed his jacket from a nearby chair. I watched, almost dispassionately, as he muttered something under his breath, a feeble attempt at a farewell or perhaps an admission of guilt, and then he stepped out of the room, leaving Emily alone in the midst of her disintegrating facade. His departure, though quiet, carried a weight of resignation that was impossible to ignore. It was as if, in that single act, he had accepted that he could no longer be part of the charade and had chosen to distance himself from the inevitable ruin. Inside the living room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The smug, defiant energy that had once hung in the air was now replaced by a palpable sense of defeat and helplessness. Emily's attempts to salvage her composure were futile. Her once confident posture now slumped, and every frantic gesture only served to unleash her vulnerability. I could almost taste the bitter irony as I realized that the cocky woman who had laughed on the phone and dismissed our years of shared history was now utterly powerless. The the very foundation of her empire crumbling before her eyes. I stepped back slightly, allowing the weight of her despair to fill the space, knowing that this was the moment when she would finally understand that there was nowhere to run. Every measure I had taken had been designed to ensure that her options were exhausted, and now, with her financial assets frozen and her new partner rendered mute by the shock of what was unfolding, it was clear that the fall had begun. I reached for my phone briefly, not to engage in further communication, but simply to record a mental note of this turning point, a moment that would mark the irreversible shift in our lives. The echoes of her desperate cries mingled with the distant hum of traffic outside, and I could sense that every person in that room, even those who had remained silent until now, understood that something irrevocable had occurred. The room was heavy with unspoken judgment, each silent gaze a testament to the downfall of the woman who had once held herself above reproach. Even the lighting, which had once cast a flattering glow over everything, now seemed harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the rawness of the moment. As I stood there, my mind raced through the final steps I had taken over the preceding months. Every discreet meeting, every late-night call to trusted advisors, every document signed and every asset shifted was coming together in this single, fateful moment. I recalled the quiet hours spent poring over bank statements and legal files, each piece of evidence a silent promise that I would not allow her betrayal to go unanswered. And now, as the reality of her bank accounts being frozen unfolded before her, I felt a calm satisfaction. It was not vindictive glee that I experienced, but a profound certainty that I had already secured my future and that every action she had taken would now be repaid in full. I could sense that Emily was on the brink of breaking entirely, her once defiant eyes now glistening with tears of regret and shock. The power she had wielded so carelessly was gone, replaced by the stark reality of her situation. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the full gravity of the moment sink in, not just for her, but for everyone witnessing the collapse of the empire she had built on deception. In that heavy, decisive moment, I knew that the final act of her downfall was now set in motion. There was no further need for desperate appeals or frantic calls for help. She was entirely isolated in her miscalculation, with even her new partner and the few remaining allies having abandoned her. As I watched her, alone in that once familiar space now transformed into a stage for her humiliation, I understood that I had not only protected what was mine but had also delivered a message. In the game of trust and power, betrayal carries a cost that no one can escape. The fall had begun, and with it, the end of an era defined by her misplaced arrogance and my long-simmering resolve. I stood there, the weight of every meticulously gathered piece of evidence anchoring me in the present, fully aware that this was the beginning of a transformation that would echo far beyond this single, dramatic night. The truth, cold and unforgiving, had finally triumphed, and I knew that as the morning light approached, it would illuminate not just the ruins of her empire, but also the rebirth of my own unassailable future. The following morning, the fallout from the previous night spread like wildfire through the corridors of the business world and beyond. I awoke before dawn, still reeling from the cold clarity of that long, tension-filled evening, yet feeling an inner calm that only comes when you know you have secured your rightful position. As I sat at my desk, my mind replayed the dramatic collapse I had witnessed in our living room. A collapse that had not only dismantled Emily's carefully constructed empire, but also heralded the inevitable public reckoning that was about to unfold. I could feel a steady, almost clinical resolve taking shape as I switched on the television and scrolled through the news headlines. In bold letters, across multiple networks and business news channels, a story was breaking out: corporate fraud scandal. CEO's shocking betrayal exposed. The headline, sharp and unyielding, confirmed what I had known for months from the meticulously documented evidence now laid bare before Emily. Investors were already beginning to drop her like a hot potato, and our clients, those who had once placed their trust in the leadership of our joint venture, were now retreating into uncertainty, unwilling to risk their own reputations on her mismanagement. I could feel the weight of the news settling in my chest, not as a burden of guilt, but as a vindication of the relentless work I had put in behind the scenes. Every phone call, Every email I had sent to trusted colleagues and advisors in the days following our confrontation had been aimed at ensuring that the truth would not remain hidden. And now, as the news story unfolded across every major outlet, it was clear that the tide had turned irrevocably. I watched with a steady gaze as live reports detailed how regulatory bodies had begun their investigations, how the SEC was combing through the financial records that I had painstakingly compiled, and how whispers of lawsuits and resignations were beginning to ripple through the upper echelons of our industry. The public fallout was swift and merciless. Within hours, my phone was inundated with calls from investors, business partners, and even a few of our longtime clients, all seeking clarification or reassurance about the stability of the company. I responded with measured, calm statements that focused on the integrity of our operations and the steps we had taken to ensure transparency. Behind every conversation, however, lay a private satisfaction, a silent affirmation that the meticulous planning and quiet determination I had embodied were now paying off in spades. I had long suspected that Emily's overreaching ambition and her cavalier handling of our company's assets would eventually catch up with her. Now, every whispered rumor of corporate fraud, every leaked document, every halting report on her unauthorized transactions was like another brick in the wall of her collapse. I could feel that the narrative was shifting, that the public was beginning to see through the carefully curated facade she had maintained for so long. At the same time, I could not help but notice how the people around me reacted to the news. Even within our inner circle, there was a palpable sense of relief that the truth had finally emerged. I received a brief, congratulatory message from Jason, a silent nod of approval that our shared secret was no longer a burden but a badge of honor for those who had stood by me. I also noted the quiet resignation in the messages from a few former colleagues who now saw that Emily's leadership was nothing more than a series of empty promises. And then, instead, there was a sober acknowledgement that justice, in its own relentless way, had caught up with her. The consequences of her betrayal were now a matter of public record, a lesson for anyone who thought they could manipulate trust and power without facing the repercussions. Throughout the day, I spent time reviewing my own statements, ensuring that my part in these events was clear and unassailable. I coordinated with our legal team, who were busy finalizing the details of every transaction and reassigning every asset to ensure that no vestige of Emily's influence remained. I felt a quiet pride as I realized that our company was not only surviving this scandal, but was poised to thrive in its aftermath. The careful restructuring of our business model, the public reaffirmations of our commitment to transparency and accountability, all served as a counterbalance to the chaos that Emily had unleashed. The very same meticulous planning that had enabled me to secure our assets was now ensuring that our company would emerge stronger, more resilient, and ultimately more respected in the industry. As evening fell, I sat in my new office, a place that had become a symbol of both my personal resilience and the rebirth of our company, and reflected on the events of the day. The public fallout had been swift and brutal, but it had also been necessary. In the harsh light of day, the truth had been laid bare for all to see, and in that exposure lay the promise of a new beginning, free from the lies and betrayals that had once threatened to consume us. I thought about the countless hours I had spent preparing for this moment, the silent nights filled with strategy and the relentless pursuit of accountability. Every piece of evidence, every meticulously gathered document, was now a stepping stone to a future where I would no longer be defined by the treachery of a woman who had once vowed to share everything with me. Instead, I would emerge as the sole architect of my own destiny, a man who had not only weathered the storm but had mastered it. In that quiet, contemplative moment, as I looked out over the city lights that twinkled like distant promises of hope, I realized that the public fallout was only the beginning. The collapse of Emily's false empire was a turning point, a moment when the scales of power had finally tipped in my favor. I closed my eyes briefly, savoring the hard-won clarity of the day, and allowed myself to acknowledge that while the road ahead might be fraught with challenges, I had already set the stage for a future that was mine to command. And as I sat there in the fading light, the echo of every damning headline and every whispered word of judgment mingled with the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. I knew that this was not merely the end of a scandal. It was the dawn of a new era defined by truth, resilience, and the unyielding power of preparation. I sat in my spacious office, a quiet haven of order and purpose, when the door swung open and there she was, Emily, standing in the doorway with an expression that seemed to mix desperation with a flicker of regret. Her eyes, once so full of defiant arrogance, now held a vulnerability that was entirely new to me. I looked up from the stack of documents on my desk, knowing that this was the moment I had been both dreading and anticipating for so long. The room, normally filled with the steady hum of work and the soft murmur of colleagues in distant offices, fell into an expectant silence as she stepped further inside. "Nathan, please. I made a mistake," she pleaded, her voice trembling ever so slightly, as if the weight of her own actions were finally catching up with her. I paused, allowing the gravity of her words to hang in the air, before reaching slowly for the neatly organized divorce papers that had been waiting in my briefcase. I slid them across the polished desk with deliberate calm, my eyes never leaving hers. "I know," I replied softly, the words carrying more than a mere acknowledgement. They were a statement of finality, a quiet declaration that everything had been decided long before this moment. Her hand, which had been reaching out uncertainly, now hovered over the papers, and I could see the tremble in her fingers as she hesitated, caught between pride and the realization of her impending loss. For a long, suspended moment, I watched as she stared at the document, her eyes scanning the lines of legal language that would sever the ties between us forever. Every second of that silence felt like a lifetime, as if each heartbeat was a reminder of the years we had spent together, of the trust we had built and ultimately shattered. I felt a steady resolve deep within me, a calm certainty that I had prepared for this very moment with meticulous care, ensuring that every asset and every piece of our shared history was now secure in my hands. I continued to observe her as she slowly picked up a pen, her hand shaking uncontrollably. The simple act of signing those papers carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, and with each stroke of her pen, I could almost feel the foundation of her carefully constructed empire crumble. I knew that once those signatures were complete, the future would no longer hold any promise of reconciliation or shared dreams. It was not a moment of triumph born out of cruelty, but rather the natural conclusion of a long, painful process. A process that had forced both of us to confront the reality of our broken marriage. I took a deep breath, the cool air of the office mingling with the tension that seemed to saturate the space, and let silence stretch between us for a few long moments. The divorce papers lay there, a symbol of the irrevocable change that was about to take place, and I found myself thinking about all the nights I had spent poring over legal documents, preparing for this eventuality, making sure that nothing would be left to chance. Every word, every clause had been scrutinized and meticulously arranged to ensure that when this moment arrived, there would be no room for ambiguity or regret. Emily's eyes glistened with tears, but I could also see the faint glimmer of understanding, an acknowledgement that her actions had led to this inevitable outcome. The empire she had so proudly flaunted, the business ventures, and the public image she had worked so hard to maintain, were now nothing more than fragments of a life that had once been intertwined with mine. In that quiet, intimate moment, as I watched her sign her name with a trembling hand, I felt a mixture of sorrow and relief, a bittersweet sense of closure that, despite everything, allowed me to move forward. I did not speak of forgiveness or of the possibility of turning back time, for I knew that there was no room for such emotions now. The truth was as clear as the ink on the paper. She had chosen her own path, and in doing so, she had relinquished any claim to the life we had built together. When she finally set the pen down, her hand still shaking, the reality of the moment was undeniable. I watched her carefully, the silence in the room heavy with the echoes of what had been and what could never be again. I gathered the signed papers and slid them back into the briefcase with the same deliberate calm that had carried me through this entire ordeal. As I did so, I felt a profound sense of detachment, an acceptance that sometimes the only way to reclaim one's future is to let the past dissolve into the background of what once was. I looked at her one last time, our eyes meeting in a silent exchange that spoke of regret, finality, and the understanding that nothing would ever be the same. Without a word, I rose from my chair and walked to the door, leaving her alone in the quiet aftermath of a decision that had been inevitable for far too long. Outside, the cool morning air greeted me as I stepped into the corridor, and with each step away from that office, I felt the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. I knew that her name was now synonymous with failure, a cautionary tale of arrogance and betrayal in the annals of our shared history. As I walked through the building, my mind was already turning to the future, to the new beginnings that awaited me in the wake of this final act. I had not only protected what was rightfully mine, but I had also ensured that I would walk away untouched by the ruins of what had been a crumbling empire. In that quiet, resolute moment, I embraced the reality that sometimes the most powerful act of revenge is simply to move on, to build a new life on the foundation of truth and unwavering determination. And so, as the door closed softly behind me, I carried with me the finality of those signed papers, a tangible reminder that while some chapters may end in heartbreak, they also open the door to a future defined solely by the choices I make, the victories I secure, and the unyielding strength with which I command my own destiny. The next morning, as the first hints of dawn crept over the city skyline, I awoke to the cold reality that the fallout from the previous night was no longer confined to the walls of our private confrontation. It had burst forth into the public sphere with a fury I had long anticipated. I sat at my desk in the quiet sanctum of my office, the soft glow of my computer screen illuminating the meticulous notes and legal documents that had become my steadfast companions over these turbulent months. My phone began to ring incessantly, its shrill tone a persistent reminder that while I had spent the previous night orchestrating the unraveling of Emily's empire, the true reckoning was now unfolding in the public eye. As I scrolled through the barrage of notifications and messages, my heart sank and then steadied in a familiar rhythm of measured resolve. The headlines were splashed across every major news outlet: corporate fraud scandal, CEO's shocking betrayal exposed. The words echoed through the digital ether, each syllable a sharp indictment of the web of deceit that Emily had spun around our once shared enterprise. Investors, who had once clung to her every promise, were now abandoning ship, dropping her like a hot potato as the scandal deepened. Our clients, those who had placed their trust in the public persona of our company, were now refusing to do business with someone whose integrity had been so flagrantly undermined. Every news update, every snippet of leaked information, confirmed what I had known for months. Emily's carefully curated image was crumbling, and with it, her career was disintegrating before our eyes. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the headlines and the quiet satisfaction that the truth was finally being broadcast for all to see. The public fallout was swift and merciless, and as I read through the endless stream of articles and reports, I could almost hear the collective gasp of an industry shocked by the betrayal of trust. I noticed that even Daniel, the silent partner who had once stood by her side with a self-assured air, had inexplicably vanished from the scene. His sudden disappearance was not lost on me. It was as if the fabric of her entire support system was unraveling, leaving her isolated and exposed. I checked my phone repeatedly, expecting to see her name flashing on the screen in a desperate plea for help or a frantic request for an explanation, but every call went unanswered. With every missed call and unreturned text, I felt a quiet confirmation that the downfall I had orchestrated was irrevocable. I continued to field calls from worried investors and clients, offering measured reassurances that the integrity of the business would be preserved, even as the scandal unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. I was careful to speak in tones of calm authority, my words chosen to instill confidence in those who depended on the stability of our company. Every statement I made was backed by the silent strength of the evidence I had amassed over the past months, a silent ledger of truth that now bolstered my every word. In quiet moments between calls, I reviewed the detailed reports from regulatory bodies and legal advisors, all of whom confirmed that the evidence of Emily's mismanagement and fraudulent dealings was not only overwhelming but legally unassailable. The SEC had initiated investigations, and whispers of lawsuits began to circulate through the corridors of power. It was a public spectacle of accountability, and though I never sought vindication through the media, I found a measure of satisfaction in knowing that justice, in its purest form, was being served. The headlines, with their stark imagery and incendiary language, were a constant reminder of the shift in power that had occurred. While Emily had once basked in the glow of adulation as the charismatic CEO, she was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a warning to all who would dare manipulate trust and betray the very foundations of a partnership. I could sense the bitter irony in it all. The same woman who had so arrogantly declared her intention to divorce and start anew with her new partner was now being vilified in boardrooms and newsrooms alike. I spent the better part of the morning composing careful responses to inquiries from business associates and investors, my tone resolute and unwavering as I outlined the steps we were taking to protect the company. My words were precise, each sentence carefully constructed to leave no room for doubt. The integrity of our operations would prevail, and any attempt to tarnish our reputation with lies would be met with the full force of accountability. In between these calls, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the series of events that had led us to this point. The relentless hours of quiet preparation, the painstaking documentation of every unauthorized transaction, and the long nights spent strategizing. Each of those moments had been a silent prelude to the public downfall that was now unfolding. I recalled the precise moment when the first headline had appeared on my screen, and a small, inward smile had crept across my face. Not one of gloating, but of deep, quiet satisfaction that the truth was finally out. The world was now witnessing what I had known all along. That betrayal, when meticulously documented and exposed, could not hide behind a veneer of charm and confidence. I realized that the public fallout was more than just a career-ending scandal for Emily. It was a complete dismantling of a false narrative that had long misled investors, employees, and clients alike. With each new update, the facade she had so carefully maintained was stripped away, revealing the stark, unvarnished reality beneath. As the day wore on, I found solace in the fact that the chaos unfolding around her was not something I had engineered out of malice, but rather as a necessary act of preservation for the company and for myself. The finality of the headlines, the finality of the evidence, was a vindication of all the quiet, relentless work I had done. In that moment, surrounded by the ringing of phones, the steady hum of urgent emails, and the pervasive buzz of scandal in the air, I knew that while the public fallout was devastating for Emily, it was also the beginning of a new era, one where truth and accountability reigned supreme. And as I continued to field calls and issue statements, I could feel a quiet, unyielding resolve growing within me. A resolve that promised that, no matter how far she fell, I would remain the guardian of our shared legacy and the rightful architect of our future. I sat in my sleek, newly appointed office high above the city, a space that had come to symbolize everything I had reclaimed. And as I sipped a final, contemplative cup of coffee, I allowed my thoughts to wander over the journey that had brought me here. In the soft glow of the morning light filtering through the expansive windows, I read an email notification that confirmed what I had long suspected. Emily's bankruptcy had been finalized. The screen displayed the final legal documents, the signatures of the court, the closing of the chapter that had been her empire of deceit. I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction ripple through me, not a harsh triumph born of bitterness, but rather the steady, unyielding relief of a man who had, at long last, regained control over his own destiny. In that moment, as I leaned back in my ergonomically designed chair, I replayed the many steps that had led to this ultimate moment of finality, a journey that began with that fateful phone call when Emily's voice had dripped with cold amusement and ended here, with the undeniable proof of her complete downfall. I remembered how, as the news broke out and the world learned of the corporate fraud scandal, every move I had made, every carefully documented transaction and every piece of evidence I had gathered, had all converged into this final, irrevocable act of retribution. It was the final move in a long, intricate game of strategy and power, a game in which I had played my cards carefully while she, blinded by arrogance, had gambled away everything that once defined her. I took a deep breath, feeling the steady thrum of my heart, a sound that, for so long, had been heavy with betrayal and sorrow but now beat with a quiet, resolute strength, and allowed myself a moment of introspection. I recalled the countless nights spent poring over financial records and legal documents, The careful discussions with trusted advisors and lawyers, the silent planning in the depths of a long, lonely study that had once been my sanctuary of strategy. Every detail had mattered, and every silent sacrifice had been made with the understanding that if you do not protect what is truly yours, then no one will. As I scrolled through the final email, my mind flashed back to the day when I had handed over the signed divorce papers, a day that marked the official severance of our shared life and the bitter end of a relationship built on betrayal. It was then that I had realized that sometimes the only way to reclaim your own identity is to let go of the past entirely, to strip away every vestige of a partnership that had become toxic and suffocating. The final move was not simply about legal victories or financial maneuvering. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my autonomy, and the freedom to build a future unburdened by the lies and manipulations of someone who had once been my partner. I looked out at the cityscape, the twinkling lights a testament to endless possibilities, and I felt an overwhelming sense of renewal. I had rebuilt not only the business but also the life that had once been obscured by the shadows of deceit and public humiliation. Every decision, every calculated risk, had led me to this moment, a moment where I was the sole architect of my destiny, unencumbered by the memory of a woman who had thought herself invincible. In that reflective quiet, I drafted a brief message to my closest allies, thanking them for their unwavering support and acknowledging that while the past could never be erased, it could be transformed into a foundation for a better future. I remembered Ethan's silent nods of approval, Jason's understanding glances, and even the subdued expressions of those who had once been part of our inner circle, all of which now reaffirmed that the collapse of Emily's world was not only justice served, but also a turning point for all of us who valued truth over pretense. The final email, with its stark, unambiguous confirmation of bankruptcy, was more than just a legal document. It was a declaration that I had finally secured the life I had always worked to build, free from the chaos of deceit and the constant shadow of betrayal. I typed a brief reply, a simple thank you, to those who had stood by me, knowing that the echoes of this final move would resonate far beyond my personal victory. In that moment, as I closed my laptop and allowed the soft hum of my office to envelop me, I felt an undeniable clarity that while revenge is often seen as a bitter pill, it can also be the catalyst for new beginnings, a chance to shed the weight of the past and step boldly into the future. And so, with a steady heart and a mind clear of regret, I whispered to myself, "Good luck, Emily," not as a taunt, but as an acknowledgement that the game was finally over and that sometimes the best revenge is simply to move on, to win without ever having to raise your voice in anger. The final move had been made, and now the future was mine to command.